All right, CCRP members, good morning. As the invitation said, it is CAFFE who is hosting us this morning. They want to have a talk with our members because they're looking for volunteers. You're all aware that there is an election coming up, and so they are looking for volunteers. But before that, they would of course need to tell us what they're doing and what they're about. So, without any further ado, Mrs. Baston, there are several persons who reached out to me to say that they couldn't join at this time, but hoped that it would be recorded and shared. So I see we are recording it. So if you would share the recording with me, please, so that I can make it accessible to our members. So
I'll certainly do that. Thank you.
That being said, over to you, Mrs. Baston.
Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here this morning and this opportunity to talk to you. Earlier I said, I'm Grace Baston. I would open my camera, but I can't. So you have to just look at that time. And I'm the chairperson of Citizens Action for Free and Fair Elections. With me this morning is our Deputy Chairman, Mr. Anton Thompson. I think he can show you himself. And our project coordinator, Mr. Anton Vassell. So our presentation will be brief, and because really we want to make space and time for any questions you have, and obviously what we want is time for you to sign up. So I'm just going to allow our Deputy Chairman to begin with some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Baston. And good morning to you all. And I want to thank CCRP for this opportunity. CAFFE was founded in 1997. In fact, if my memory serves me right, at the meeting where the idea of CAFFE was conceived, one of the persons there, along with myself, was your own founder, Jean Laurie Chin. And it was founded because of a concern about what was happening in Jamaica as far as the conduct of the electoral process was concerned. The fact is that there was constant skullduggery, particularly in particular areas, and this was calling the whole integrity of the process into question. We decided at that time to form this organization of concerned citizens just to monitor the electoral process. And we started in the elections that were held at the end of 1997, which is 28 years ago now, or coming up to 28 years ago now. And we had quite a few volunteers, most of whom were what you would say mature people in their 40s and 50s, some in their 30s, and some even older than 50s into their 60s, 70s, who were prepared to come out, to leave the comfort of their homes on election day, and go to polling stations, some of them in difficult areas, but not all of them, and to simply write down what they saw and monitor the election. And that prompted, certainly on the people who were working people, teachers, doctors, accountants, clerks, secretaries, engineers, who were prepared to do this. And so they did not have to rely alone on the general party political hacks who would be doing this work and causing the whole integrity of the process to be called into question. And so by 2 elections after that, we found that our volunteer base had gone. They had gone to work with the EOJ, we were happy at that because obviously it meant that the system itself was in better hands. However, we still needed to monitor because that is our role. And thanks to Mrs. Baston, who came up with the idea of using high school high school young people to monitor. And we began that process by 2011 elections, and we really relied heavily on that demographic since then. Most of our volunteers have come from younger people who have found it very enjoyable and very interesting to see the democratic process. And we're hoping that that will cause them to take a better view of it. Well, the EOJ, of course, true to their form, certainly saw this, and they have been targeting that demographic now as well. As Mrs. Laurichin said when we were discussing this with her a couple of years ago, she said, "Them follow back away." So they are busy recruiting at that level. But we are still getting volunteers. However, we felt that it was important to speak to you to make you aware of the opportunity for you to be part of this process, which from the very outset, I've certainly found to be very exciting and very rewarding, and to give you the opportunity to be the same. So that's the background to why we've had this interaction, and I want to thank CCRP, Jean, and your chief executive there, for the opportunity to interact with you. Mrs. Baston, you can take over here.
All right, so very quickly, friends, I usually give a little speech when I go to the high schools for the students, right? Because I find the apathy among our young people is so deep to this whole process. And I usually start by saying to them, okay, hands up if this is true for you. I don't really care about politics. I have no interest in voting or in the electoral process. The PNP and the JLP are the same thing. So as far as I'm concerned, this whole election thing is a waste of my time. And invariably, 80–90% of them put up their hands. And then I make my little speech, hoping I'll change their mind. I don't think you need that speech, but just in case anybody has forgotten, these little facts that Mr. Thompson helped me prepare, I love to share. That the fact that we've been voting in Jamaica from the 1600s, but of course, into the 19th century, but as everybody remembers, that franchise was very limited. You had to be a man. In the first instance, you had to be a white man. Then by the time blacks were allowed to vote, or men of mixed race, again, it was still men. There was a property qualification. But women in Jamaica were allowed to vote in the early 1920s, but they too had to have property qualifications. And I believe that they had to be older. They weren't sure women at the same age were as mature as men, but whatever that was. But the big date for us, of course, is 1944, when we had universal adult suffrage, where every single Jamaican, irrespective of race, gender, religion, educational level, wealth, or place in society, we were allowed to vote. And I always remind the children, this is a huge, huge deal. Why is it such a huge deal? It's because we were the first predominantly Black country to have this. We were ahead of the United States, of Canada, Australia, when we attained this. Remember, Blacks were voting, I believe, 1965 in the US, if I'm correct. But this right to vote is something that we ought to cherish. It's bedrock of our democratic system. I mean, the system is weak. It has many flaws. There are all kinds of things wrong with it, but we are still convinced it is the one that pays most attention to our rights as human beings. It is the political way of organizing ourselves that recognizes every human person and their rights. So I remind us of this because I think the apathy, it's creeping and it's deep, that voter turnout that we're seeing is not healthy for a democracy, that low voter turnout. Now, there are people who argue it's not apathy, it's just that people don't see anybody to vote for. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not good enough. As I say to the children, to whom are we leaving this process of deciding who governs us? We're leaving it to men and women whose votes can be bought with a box food and a beer. And that can't be good for us and our country. Okay, so moving right along. And everybody remembers what triggered CAFFE in the first place. We remember the fraud, we remember the intimidation. I don't know if any of you remember those days. The poor St. Hugh's girls, their green uniform had to be changed from green. If you drove an orange car, you better go get it repainted. If you didn't show up to vote if you lived in a garrison, you didn't mark your ballot and then come out and show it to everybody, you might go back and find your house firebombed. these things characterized our elections. So when citizens responded, said, no, we don't care if you vote green or orange. What we care about is that you are allowed to vote. You are allowed to exercise that franchise, and you ought to be able to, no matter where you live in this country. So it was a wonderful display of citizenship, of activism on the part of citizens for the preservation of democracy. And we've been around since 1997, as Mr. Thompson said. See Dr. Barnett there. Oh my Lord, how old is Dr. Barnett now? And you see him there on that phone. That will be him on election day, right? Taking reports of irregularities. So we have had as many, Mr. Thompson has 2,000 volunteers, I believe, in our earlier times. Since then, we haven't had that number, but we have been able to pull from our young people, again, Mr. Thompson mentioned, zealous young people who have been last in the local government elections. We had over 400 of them in the field, right? So what is the situation right now? I think you're hearing the sounds, saying to us, this will be a closely contested election. CAFFE has identified, and it's not hard to do. Mr. Thompson does a great job of looking at trends and then looking at what happened in the local government elections and looking at the strengths and the weaknesses of candidates to say, okay, here are some places that we need to monitor carefully. There are those who would say elections have been cleaned up now. There's no need for a CAFFE. We don't have that kind of fraud anymore. Our position is, the day you don't have a CAFFE, fraud creeps back in. If it's cleaned up and it's good, it's because we are there. So we're not prepared to say, okay, time for us to take a back seat because we've fixed the problem. No, as far as we're concerned, democracy not monitored, democracy not preserved and worked for is democracy threatened. And so we are looking for, we want you to be in the process. We want adults, we want mature volunteers. Part of it is, the reason is that you are freer to decide, okay, I might live in this constituency, but I'm willing to serve in another one where we would be less, not wanting to put a younger person. So it's that, that kind of flexibility that the presence of our more mature volunteers gives us that we're looking for. And obviously, this is a personal choice. We always ask you when you sign up, do you want to work in your own constituency, or are you free to be, or, maybe assign you someplace else? Okay. So that's it. I don't think I need to go through with any of you what the process, what the monitoring process would look like, but just to say that there are two important constitutional principles that underpin what we are about at CAFFE. The first is that we believe every eligible voter must be given a fair opportunity to vote. Nothing should stand in their way. And that the whole law and voting process should protect these fundamental freedoms that are in our Constitution: the freedom of conscience, of expression, of assembly, and of association. What do our volunteers do on election day? Well, they want to make sure, we're looking out for, were people allowed to exercise their franchise free from fear? We're looking for, was the voting process administered in compliance with the ROPA, where the prescribed procedures followed? So we are also watching the EOJ. We consider them, they're our friends, they're our partners, but part of our job is to say, is the electoral office doing what it's supposed to do? Are its officials properly trained, and are they carrying out the process according to the guidelines, procedures, and laws? And to what degree, if there were any problems, did they materially affect the outcome of the elections? Because if it can be demonstrated that there was significant malpractice or fraud, those results can be voided, and there may have to be a by-election or rerun the elections in that constituency. Okay. So as I said, what we observers, what we want you to be there to observe, to record, and report. That's our job. We're not there to countermand. We're not there to tell anybody what they should be doing. We're observing, we're recording, we're reporting. So it's important for us to be prepared, be present, be vigilant, and unobtrusive. There is a whole training video. We've gone very usually we would meet in town, church halls and everything to train people. But these days, once you've decided to apply, and Mr. Vassal will talk about that process, the training is online. You simply watch a 25-minute video and then do a quiz, and we consider you trained. Okay. I think that is let me stop
Other
sharing
questions?
here.
Let me thank CAFFE for this opportunity. I hope that my members will be joining in their numbers so that you will have a good source of volunteers for CAFFE. And we will wish everybody good participation in our upcoming elections, and that you will do everything to make sure that it's free and fair. All right.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for having
very, very
us.
much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
organizing this very
Good.
much.
All right.
God bless everyone.
Okay.